In the grand courts of Europe, queens were expected to be flawless. Every gesture, every word, every appearance was carefully watched. But there was one part of life they could never allow the world to see: their periods. In an age when a single drop of blood could be twisted into scandal, menstruation was treated as a dangerous secret, especially for women who ruled. For queens, this secrecy wasn't just about avoiding embarrassment. In the medieval and Renaissance courts, a ruler's physical state was tied to her political strength. Enemies, both foreign and domestic, looked for any sign of weakness. If a queen appeared pale, tired, or ill, whispers could start. And if those whispers suggested she was unclean or unfit because of her monthly cycle, it could become a weapon to undermine her rule. In some kingdoms, religious belief made this secrecy even more intense. The church taught that menstruation was a sign of impurity. Women were often barred from certain rituals or holy places during their cycles. For a queen, who was often seen as God's chosen representative, being impure could shake her divine image. So, the court developed silent systems to hide it. Historical accounts suggest that queens used layers of undergarments made from linen or fine wool to absorb the blood. These were changed frequently by trusted ladies-in-waiting who were sworn to secrecy. Some queens reportedly used herbal powders and scented cloths to disguise any odor, not only for personal comfort, but because even the faintest scent could raise suspicions among courtiers. But secrecy went beyond clothing. Royal calendars were sometimes manipulated to avoid public ceremonies during those days. If a queen's cycle coincided with an important feast, council meeting, or diplomatic event, she might suddenly fall ill with a vague, non-threatening condition like a summer chill or migraine. This allowed her to step away without raising dangerous questions. Even in marriage, discretion was vital. Queens married for alliances, not romance, and their fertility was a matter of national importance. A period was a sign she was not yet pregnant, and intense political times that could trigger panic or speculation. This meant that not only her ladies, but sometimes her physicians, were sworn to keep these details from even the king himself, unless absolutely necessary. In the palaces of France, Spain, and England, this secrecy became an art form. It was just about protecting dignity. It was about survival in a world where a woman's blood could cost her the crown. But what happened when secrecy failed? In the next part, we'll uncover a scandal in the French court, when a queen's cycle was exposed. It nearly destroyed her reign. The life of a queen was never her own. Every gesture, every glance, every faint smile at court was observed, whispered about, and dissected for meaning. But when it came to her health, especially her menstrual cycle, the pressure to maintain a flawless image was suffocating. In many European kingdoms, a queen's body was seen as a vessel for producing heirs, not as a human being with normal biological needs. Any sign of weakness could be turned against her by rivals. Menstruation was not just a private matter, it was political ammunition. If a queen was seen as unwell too often, rumors could spread that she was infertile, cursed, or unfit to rule. In the fiercely competitive courts of France, Spain, and England, these whispers could undermine a queen's power. Even something as small as missing a public event because of menstrual pain could be twisted into a scandalous story of fragility. To avoid suspicion, queens developed complex strategies to hide their periods. In the 16th century, for instance, Catherine de' Medici of France reportedly kept a rotation of specially trained ladies-in-waiting who could subtly pass her cloth pads or help her discreetly change during long state ceremonies. These women knew that even a drop of blood on the queen's gown could be seen as a national embarrassment. Seating arrangements at court events were also carefully planned. Queens often sat on thickly cushioned chairs not just for comfort, but to mask any accidents. Some had personal servants carry perfumed sachets, meant to overpower any scent that might betray the truth. In an era without modern hygiene products, odors were a genuine concern, and masking them was an art in itself. In royal banquets, queens avoided standing for too long during their period, fearing that movement could cause visible stains on their elaborate silk skirts. This led to another trick, layering underskirts with darker fabrics at the back, so that any mishap would be less visible in candlelit halls. But perhaps the greatest tool in their arsenal was timing. Royal calendars were adjusted in ways the public never realized. If possible, Diplomatic meetings, portraits, and long public appearances were scheduled around the queen's menstrual cycle. Of course, this wasn't always possible, and when it wasn't, the queen had to rely on sheer endurance, smiling and speaking with grace while hiding cramps, fatigue, and discomfort. Yet, the secrecy surrounding menstruation had a darker consequence. It reinforced the idea that women's bodies were shameful, something to hide at all costs. The very queens who were seen as the pinnacle of beauty and power were forced to act as though a natural process didn't exist. The more they concealed it, the more dangerous it became to be caught. And there were times when this secrecy backfired, times when bloodstains appeared in public, when fainting spells revealed the truth, and when the carefully constructed illusion shattered before the eyes of an entire court. Those moments, though rare, could spark political chaos and even influence royal succession. The most infamous of these incidents happened in the court of England, when, in European royal courts, menstruation was treated almost like a state secret. A queen's ability to appear divine and untouched by mortal flaws was central to her image, and so every sign of her monthly cycle had to be hidden with extreme care. In some courts, there were even coded words used by her ladies-in-waiting to communicate about her period, so that no outsider could understand what was being discussed. Servants might say she was in retreat or in prayer, polite ways of saying she was menstruating. Privacy was guarded with military precision. The queen's bedchamber was off-limits to almost everyone during these days, except her most trusted attendants. Her meals were brought quietly, and social appearances were reduced or cancelled entirely. Even letters written during this time were often handled by a trusted scribe, so that the queen did not have to appear in person, avoiding any chance of showing fatigue or discomfort. In some courts, elaborate rituals were performed to purify the queen's space before she reappeared in public. This could involve burning specific herbs, changing all bed linens, and ensuring that no male courtier entered her rooms during her seclusion. These traditions weren't only about cleanliness. They reinforced the belief that menstruation was something impure, even dangerous if seen by the wrong eyes. Interestingly, some queens used these rituals to their advantage. By declaring themselves in retreat, they could take several days away from the pressures of court politics, holding private meetings with only their closest allies. These hidden periods of seclusion allowed them to plan strategies, secure loyalties, and even make political moves without the constant gaze of rivals. But behind the veils and silken curtains, the reality remained the same. The queen was enduring a completely natural process, one shared by countless women outside the palace walls. The difference was that for her, every trace of it had to be erased from the public eye. What's most fascinating is how these customs weren't just for the queen's dignity, but also for the image of the monarchy itself. In an age where kings were seen as chosen by God, the queen's role was to embody grace and perfection at all times, even if it meant living a double life. Yet, this obsession with secrecy raises a deeper question. If queens were expected to hide such a basic part of womanhood, what else was being concealed behind the walls of those glittering palaces? In medieval and early modern Europe, queens were surrounded by physicians and herbalists who claimed to know the secrets of women's health. But many of these so-called remedies were based on superstition, not science, and some were outright dangerous. Doctors, often male and with little understanding of female anatomy, prescribed treatments meant to control or stop menstrual bleeding. One common method was the use of lead-based powders or mercury-containing ointments. These were applied to the skin or taken in small doses, under the belief they could cool the blood and stop its flow. In reality, they slowly poisoned the body. Some royal doctors insisted queens drink herbal concoctions made from plants like pennyroyal, tansy, or rue, herbs known to have strong effects on the uterus. In small amounts, they might ease cramps, but in higher doses, they could cause severe illness or miscarriage. For queens, whose duty was to produce heirs, any interference with fertility was risky. Yet, under the pressure to appear constantly healthy and capable, many took these dangerous brews without question. Bloodletting was another bizarre remedy. The idea was to balance the humors of the body by drawing blood from the arm or leg, even while a queen was menstruating. This practice left women weak, pale, and vulnerable to infection. In royal courts where image mattered above all, A queen's pale skin was often mistaken for beauty, hiding the fact that it came from illness and blood loss. Some queens endured even stranger treatments. In France, certain court physicians claimed that bathing in wine infused with rose petals could refresh the womb and mask menstrual odor. In other courts, warm milk baths were recommended, sometimes mixed with ground pearls or gold dust, as it was believed that precious minerals could purify the blood. These luxuries were not just expensive, they were ineffective. These so-called cures also served another purpose. They gave the impression that the queen was always under medical care, justifying her absence from public life during her period without admitting the real reason. The court could say she was recovering from a treatment, rather than revealing she was menstruating. This secrecy was vital, because any sign of physical weakness could invite political gossip. Rivals might question her ability to rule, bear heirs, or even survive childbirth. But while the royal physicians were busy preserving the queen's public image, their treatments often damaged her health in the long term. Chronic poisoning from metals, repeated bloodletting, and hormonal disruption from herbal overdoses left many queens fatigued and vulnerable to disease. And yet the cycle continued, because the court's obsession with appearances was stronger than concern for her well-being. Some of the most famous queens in European history carried these secrets to their graves. Letters, medical records, and servant testimonies that survived revealed just how far they went to hide the reality of menstruation. But what's even more disturbing is how these remedies weren't only about health. They were about control. By keeping queens dependent on the advice of male doctors and the approval of the court, their private lives remained under constant surveillance. Yet even these methods couldn't stop the whispers. When a queen was absent from public duties too often, rumors spread, sometimes accusing her of infertility, other times of weakness. And in royal politics, a single rumor could be deadly. In the courts of medieval and Renaissance Europe, menstruation was more than a private matter, it was a political liability. For queens, every public appearance, every banquet, and every religious procession was an opportunity for enemies to watch for signs of weakness. If a rival faction or foreign ambassador suspected a queen was on her period, whispers could spread about her unfitness to rule or bear heirs. This wasn't just superstition. In a world where royal women were valued for producing heirs, even the smallest hint of infertility or irregular cycles could be used as political ammunition. To counter this, queens often scheduled their public appearances strategically. Court calendars, banquets, and diplomatic receptions could be subtly moved to coincide with the days when they felt strongest. Of course, no one could say the real reason officially. The queen might be recovering from a headache, or observing a religious fast. Behind the scenes, ladies-in-waiting quietly ensured that the queen's wardrobe was adjusted to accommodate her hidden condition. Special garments were key. Some European queens wore underlayers padded with cloth that could discreetly hold absorbent material without staining the outer gown. Red or dark-colored petticoats were common during those times of the month, not because they were fashionable, but because they concealed potential accidents. This was also why crimson gowns occasionally appeared at court events without explanation. The rich, deep fabric wasn't just luxurious, it was protective camouflage. But secrecy went beyond clothing. Queens also relied on herbal remedies believed to balance the female body. Sage, nettle, and yarrow were brewed into teas that were thought to reduce cramps and regulate cycles. These concoctions were often prepared by trusted court apothecaries or midwives, whose loyalty to the crown was beyond question. In some cases, the ingredients were so costly that only the wealthiest women royals and high nobility could afford them. For certain queens, controlling the narrative around menstruation also meant shaping religious obligations. In Catholic Europe, menstruating women were officially discouraged from taking part in certain church rituals, including communion. But queens could not simply disappear from public worship without raising suspicion. Some solved this by attending services but avoiding physical participation, using the excuse of illness or fasting days. Others quietly bribed clerics to look the other way. The need for secrecy created a kind of silent sisterhood among the queen's inner circle. Ladies-in-waiting became gatekeepers, managing access to the queen during her period and shielding her from prying eyes. These women were not merely attendants, they were confidants who protected royal dignity in a court. where even the smallest piece of gossip could ruin a reputation. The irony is that while kings could publicly fall ill and be pitied, queens had to hide a completely natural process as if it were a scandal. And for centuries, they succeeded so well, in fact, that few historical records even mention menstruation at all. What we do know comes from letters, private diaries, and rare accounts from foreign ambassadors, who occasionally notice sudden changes in court schedules. Yet one question lingers. What happened when secrecy failed and a queen's period was exposed in public? That is where the stakes became truly dangerous and, sometimes the consequences were severe. Even in the most lavish courts of medieval and Renaissance Europe, there was one thing queens could not hide: the smell. Without modern menstrual products or proper hygiene, the odor from menstrual blood could be noticeable. And in a royal court where every move was scrutinized, this was dangerous for a queen's dignity. Servants sometimes burned herbs or incense in her chambers, not for religious purposes, but to mask the scent. Popular choices included rosemary, lavender, and frankincense. In some courts, a lady-in-waiting would discreetly carry a small pomander, a metal ball filled with spices or dried flowers, so that when she stood near the queen, the air smelled sweet. But scent was only one part of the problem. Menstruation carried deep stigma in Europe, rooted in religious and cultural beliefs. The Bible and medieval church teachings often portrayed menstruation as a sign of impurity, making it a spiritual as well as a physical challenge. Queens were sometimes expected to avoid certain religious ceremonies during their period to maintain purity. For a ruler who was also considered God's chosen representative, this could feed dangerous whispers of unworthiness or weakness. Historical records suggest that some queens tried to avoid public audiences entirely during these days, using illness as an excuse. For example, Catherine de' Medici was said to suddenly withdraw from court activities, blaming headaches or faintness. This allowed her to manage her cycle without public scandal, though it also risked appearing politically weak. Clothing played a major role in covering up potential stains. Layers of heavy skirts, padded underskirts, and richly embroidered overskirts acted as both protection and camouflage. In winter, these layers made sense, but in the summer heat, it could be stifling, and the smell risk grew worse. Some queens reportedly had a specific monthly gown that was darker in color and thicker in fabric to hide any mishaps. Yet despite all these efforts, gossip was relentless. Ladies-in-waiting who noticed the signs might whisper to others, and rumors could spread quickly in a court hungry for scandal. Menstrual mishaps could even be twisted into political weapons. If a queen was seen as often unwell or unable to attend to her duties, rivals could claim she was too weak to rule or bear heirs. In a time when fertility was directly tied to power, this could be deadly for a queen's influence. It is telling that some of the most carefully guarded royal secrets weren't about wars or alliances, but about the intimate, hidden realities of a queen's body. This secrecy wasn't just about privacy. It was about survival in a world where even a natural cycle could be turned into a public disgrace. But hiding a period was not just a matter of perfumes and dark dresses. Some queens went so far as to create elaborate medical deceptions, turning to trusted physicians to explain away the signs. And sometimes, these lies became a political weapon in themselves. In European royal courts, a queen's beauty and grace were her currency. Every gesture, every smile, was meant to project an image of perfection. But behind the jewels and fine silks, the reality of her body was something to be hidden at all costs. If a queen's menstrual cycle became public knowledge, it could be twisted into political gossip. Enemies might claim she was unfit to attend state matters, that her female weaknesses distracted her from duty. For some, it even became a tool in succession debates. If she was known to be menstruating, whispers could start about whether she was pregnant or not. The secrecy went beyond politics. Many queens were deeply isolated during their periods, not only from their husbands, but also from close ladies-in-waiting. Some were forced to keep entirely separate chambers to avoid any chance of staining bedding, because even the smallest trace could ruin their reputation. The queen's laundry was often handled in complete secrecy, with only one or two trusted women allowed to wash her cloths or garments. But this secrecy had its price. The lack of open discussion meant no progress in creating safer or more comfortable menstrual products for centuries. Even in the 18th century, queens relied on methods no better than those used in the medieval period. It was a strange paradox. Women who had access to the finest luxuries on earth still endured the same discomfort and risk of infection as peasant women. In the courts of France, England, and Spain, the queen's health was a matter of state, but her menstrual cycle was treated like a shameful secret. This silence also meant that medical treatment was often inadequate. Physicians might know she was unwell, but never be told the true reason, which sometimes led to dangerous remedies that did more harm than good. Some queens developed their own discreet networks of female support, trusted servants who could smuggle herbs, teas, or soft linen without drawing suspicion. These small acts of solidarity were lifelines in a world where a single stain could spark a scandal. Still, the unspoken rule remained the same. A queen could be seen as powerful, wise, and even fierce, but never as a woman whose body followed the natural cycles of life. This silence shaped not only their personal comfort, but also the way history remembered them. And in one European court, this silence would soon be shattered, when an unexpected event forced an entire palace to acknowledge what they had long pretended didn't exist. In the courts of Europe, image was everything. A queen's worth wasn't measured in kindness or leadership. It was judged by how perfectly she could embody an almost mythical ideal: graceful, composed, untouchable. But when the queen's body betrayed her once a month, that image was suddenly under threat. Whispers could ruin her. Single sign of weakness could be turned into gossip that traveled faster than truth. So her attendants became masters of illusion. Layers of heavy fabric disguised stains, while perfumes, sometimes overpowering, masked any scent. Servants rotated her gowns multiple times a day, and discreet hand signals were developed so a lady-in-waiting could lead the queen away before anyone noticed. Behind the closed doors of her chambers, the queen would change into fresh garments, sometimes 2 or 3 times before returning to the hall as if nothing had happened. But the deception didn't stop there. If she seemed tired or pale, official announcements would claim she was fasting for the Lord or observing a period of prayer. No one outside her circle could know the truth. These lies became part of court life, repeated so often that even some members of her household began to believe them. The physical toll, however, was brutal. With limited knowledge of women's health, many queens relied on treatments that were little more than superstition, drinking vinegar to dry the blood, binding their stomachs to keep the humors in balance, or eating strange mixtures of herbs and wine to speed the bleeding. Some remedies caused more pain than relief, but refusing them risked being seen as uncooperative with the physicians appointed by the crown. This constant pressure to appear flawless created a silent kind of suffering one no portrait painter would ever record. The public saw only the radiant queen in silk and jewels. They never saw the woman behind the veil, sitting on the edge of her bed with clenched teeth, willing herself to stand and walk without betraying the truth. And yet, despite the secrecy, there were times when even the most careful concealment failed. Sudden fainting spell in the middle of a ceremony, a gown hurriedly abandoned behind locked doors, servants whispering in corridors. Every slip became fuel for rumors. And sometimes those rumors carried more danger than the truth itself, because in certain courts, the wrong whisper about a queen's body could be turned into a weapon.